right, welcome everyone, or Shio, which is hello in Cherokee, as we learned on our adventure session with Cherokee Elder Gil Jackson last year. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Von Tron with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. Many of you know about the Appalachian Trail. The trail is a unit of our national park system and a long-distance hiking trail that goes through 14 states from Georgia to Maine. Our organization, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, is a nonprofit that works with hundreds of partners like the National Park Service and thousands of volunteers to make sure that the trail is an experience that everyone can enjoy and learn from. So we are so excited to offer this virtual adventure series, which is geared for young people but is engaging for all ages. Last year, we took a hike up the trail from Georgia to Maine, exploring different subjects connected to the trail in each state with local educators and partners. This year, we're exploring cultural heritage as well as social and natural history along the AT and throughout public lands in the United States. This series covers a wide range of topics, from how heritage and history can be expressed through art and creative writing to the importance of acknowledging native lands. Please check out the ones you may have missed on our YouTube channel, which can be found on the adventure page listed here. We are thrilled you joined us for this month's adventure session on Black Bears on the Trail. It can be such a thrill seeing a bear along the Appalachian Trail corridor, and while usually shy creatures, there are circumstances where bears can be a nuisance or react in a threatening manner. Many times this is due to a bear being habituated to human food, and there's nothing worse than having hung your food for the night and discovering that only bits and pieces remain by breakfast time. In an effort to minimize human-bear conflict, the ATC and partners such as the U.S. Forest Service and the National Park Service have been working on food storage guidance to help keep you, your food, and wildlife safe. While there's more to come on the topic of food storage, we want to give a huge shout out to our partners at BearWild for not only sponsoring this adventure today, but also donating over 100 bear canisters for a bear canister loaner program starting this summer in Georgia, Vermont, and New Hampshire. BearWild manufactures bear-resistant food canisters that are designed by backpackers and tested by bears. They've also generously provided a prize for the adventure raffle, so stay tuned until the very end to see if you are the winner. Again, there will be more information to come on the Bear Canister Loaner Program and AT Food Storage. We'll also provide links with more info and updates on this at the end of the session. So without further ado, I'm honored to introduce our presenters for this adventure session. So our first speaker will be Kim Deloizer, who is the BearWild Tennessee coordinator. Kim grew up working on his family's farm in eastern Tennessee. He graduated from the University of Tennessee in wildlife and fisheries science. He began his career with the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in 1978, working as a wild boar hunter and later served as the park's wildlife biologist. During his 32-year career, Kim's involvement primarily focused on nuisance black bear management, wild boar control, white-tailed deer management, and reintroduction efforts for elk, river otters, and peregrine falcons. Kim retired from the National Park Service in 2010. For the following 9 years, Kim worked for the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation as a conservation program manager, focusing on elk restoration throughout the eastern U.S. For several years, he also managed the elk hunting activities for the Escalante Ranch near Vernal, Utah. Currently, Kim works as the Tennessee coordinator for BearWild, a division of Appalachian Black Bear Rehabilitation and Release Center, focusing on incorporating bear wise in Tennessee and surrounding states to minimize bear and human conflicts. For the past several years, Kim has also served as an instructor of chemical immobilization of wildlife classes for Safe Capture International. He received the North Carolina Wildlife Conservationist of the Year Award and has co-authored 2 books, Bear in the Back Seat 1 and 2. The first book is a Wall Street Journal bestseller. Kim has keen respect and appreciation for the outdoors and wildlife and feels extremely blessed they have been a major part of his life. Susie Spikol, our other presenter, is the Community Programs Director and Teacher Naturalist for the Hare Center for Conservation Education. Susie spent her youth exploring the wild edges of Brooklyn, New York, and roving the rolling green hills of southern Vermont. After one statistics class, she abandoned her childhood dream of becoming a wolf scientist and decided that teaching children in the outdoors was just as exciting as working with a pack of wild canines. After interning as an environmental educator with the Central Park Conservancy and several summer stints with Massachusetts Audubon Society, she wandered upon the Hare Center in 1991, and to the Hare Center's great benefit has never left. When she's not catching frogs with preschoolers, tracking bobcats with middle schoolers, or hawk watching with her own 3 children, Susie tucks away time to write. Kim and Susie, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm now going to pass it over to Kim.
Thank you, Vaughn. I really appreciate that very much too. And it's been my pleasure. It's my pleasure to meet with you guys today, even though it's online Zoom. Anyway, yeah, bears. We've a lot to talk about with bears. We're going to try to cover a lot of things in a short period of time too. So if I talk too fast, I apologize. And if you can't understand my accent, some people say I have an accent, but I can't see it. But anyway, if I do, you can ask in the chat really what I'm talking about. So it's been my pleasure to be with you here today. So let's talk a little bit about trying to live with black bears. What we're going to try to cover, at least the highlights too. Like I said, bears are pretty important to people too. They're as we say, they're a charismatic megafauna too, and people love to see them. They love to get close to them, and they love to learn about them too. And so it's just a good keystone species, I think, for eastern U.S. and throughout too. We're going to look at why we need to understand about bears. Food storage, both in the front country and back country. Progressive behavioral change is one of the things that we worked on pretty hard in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, of trying to reverse these bears that are starting to lose their behavior, the wild behavior. Also going to look at bear behavior. Some of the things that's very important to know. A lot of people really have a hard time understanding what the bear is telling us, and we're going to look at those different behaviors. Last thing is what to do if you encounter a bear. Most of the encounters are going to be positive. They're going to hear you, smell you, see you. They're going to take off running, and then hopefully that's going to be the end of it too. So that's really the kind that we like to have. So, but not all of them go that way. So we're going to look at those things. So first we're going to look at why do we even need to know about black bears too. Of course, first of all is for our own safety, the safety of people too, which is obviously paramount to be able to do that too. And typically, if we do the right things, more than likely, we're always going to come out, successful in the safety category too. Another thing, it's very important to protect bears. A lot of people feel like, that a bear losing its behavior from a wild behavior to a food conditioned behavior is not a big deal, but it's a big deal because these animals are extremely smart. If you equate the intelligence of the size of a brain, primates are number 1, bears are number 2, and believe it or not, hogs or pigs are number 3. So they have a tremendous memory to remember things from a long time ago. I see this picture there on the left. It reminds me of moving of a sow with 2 cubs over to the east end of the park. And the cubs were really tiny, and apparently they grew up. The mother weaned them. 2 years later, those 2 cubs showed back up as 2-year-olds back at this site. So they remembered where this location was. So they're very, 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 very knowledgeable and smart and intelligent and strong. Also, it's to increase your appreciation and worth of black bears too. I always start a presentation. I say, well, what do you think a black bear is worth? Give me a monetary figure. What is a black bear worth? Well, we get answers from everything from, well, if it's tearing into my car, or it's destroying my house, or it's tearing up something, or it's injuring my kids or something, it's not worth very much. But for the most part, other people will say, oh, it's unbelievable. It's any amount of money. There's no amount of money that could really value the worth of a bear. And there's everything in between that people will place a value on a black bear. It just depends on what that bear is doing. Let me say one thing about bears is that bears typically are like people. They are all different. They all have different personalities, and they all react differently depending on the day. They go through stresses just like we do. When we get really hungry, and we can get pretty cranky sometimes, and bears can do the same thing as well. We learn things, we learn good things, we learn bad things, and bears really are no different. The last thing why we need to know about black bears is to help to educate others too. So basically, there's not enough of us and too many of them to be able to educate just from a few people. So people need to help police themselves. Not only do they know the right thing to do, but when they see someone feeding a bear or doing something wrong, they need to take some action to at least call the authorities let them know, or to tell those people that what they're doing, they're killing the bear, because garbage does kill bears. And we've seen that happen time and time again. Okay, let's talk real quickly about food storage, front country versus back country, because it's different type of users, totally different. If you're in the front country, no doubt you can run to your car, or you can run to your cabin or something, jump in and close the door. Well, you can't do that in the back country. So you have to basically utilize different techniques to be able to ensure. Steve Herrero, who wrote the book Bear Attacks, and he's kind of the guru for bear attack information from all over North America. And Steve told me once before, the fundamental way that we manage bears, the fundamental way is we keep our food and garbage away from them. And when we do so, it maintains that wild behavior, and they're going to live a lot more and longer productive lives than when that wild behavior is stripped from them. So food storage is critical, and is very, very important too, because these animals, and Susie's going to talk a little bit later about how important smell is and stuff too. They can smell pretty doggone good. So in the backcountry, we have some options here on aerial food storage cables. If you're in the Smokies, maybe other areas too. We talked a little bit about the food storage canisters. Those are obviously very, very good, very, very effective too. Some of the, well, let me say one more thing. Sometimes you may have to hang your food on your own between two trees to be able to suspend that from that too. And it takes a little more ingenuity to be able to do that, a little more common sense. And a lot of people that are used to backcountry, I'll tell you, a lot of them don't have a lot of common sense. Remember, we've had a lot of visitors in the park that have come up with questions that will just blow you away, and really questions whether these people should even be out of their vehicle or not too. But people want to know what time we feed the bears, what time do we let them out. We had one person that said, at what elevation does a deer have to travel to before it turns into an elk? Well, it's pretty doggone high, I can promise you that. So we've had some people that really don't understand. I think a lot of people have been raised on concrete and asphalt. They've never played in a creek, and those people really are pretty naive about biology and obviously about our critters that they may encounter in the outdoors. Some of the do's and don'ts, obviously, some of them are very self-explanatory, common sense type things. Don't go to bed and take your food with you. Don't cook in your tent. Don't cook near where you're going to sleep. I mean, common sense should kick in here and tell people what they should or shouldn't do. Some of the do's is obviously hang your food, store your food in a food storage container in the backcountry if that's available, or use the canisters as well too. But make sure that you have some type of system in plan before you get there too, and say, well, I didn't have anywhere to put my food. So it's very, very important for planning as well too, because once those bears get your food, then they remember that. They have a tremendous memory. They're going to remember how they got food, and then it's going to make it tough on the next person down the line. The front country, I'll just mention that. Make sure people dispose of their garbage in animal resistant containers. Some of those are really substantial and some are not. If you're in a campground, putting your food inside of your camper or your vehicle is a secure place. At least here in the East, before, bears would never, in the East, I've never heard of bears opening up car doors to get inside to look for food until just in the past several years. So that's a learned behavior those animals have picked up too. The mothers learn, they train their cubs, and then the behavior goes on. So disposal of your garbage in the front country is very, very important. I'm going to cover this pretty quickly here too, but it's very important to understand how wild bears become food condition bears. And we'll talk about the different behaviors. Now, I use the word food condition for bears that have behaviors where they approach us and their intent is to come and obtain our food. It's not necessarily to feed on natural food near us, which I term habituated, but it's food condition bears. So wild bears will change over. This is what you have to do. The offspring of mother bears that are wild, when they are weaned, they know mama tells them do not get near people or the smell of people or the presence of people too. She trained those to be able to live a long, productive life and stay away from people because people can be dangerous. So anyway, I guess it's kind of like I tell people, it's kind of like when you take your children to your kids to college and drop them off and they're on their own, they make their own decisions. They don't always make the right decisions too. And weaned bears are the same way. When mama's not around, guess what? They're going to start investigating some things that they would never do if she was there. So what happens here, look at the very bottom of the chart here, down where it says wild bear at that left side there. Basically, those are natural foods. They, you know, wild things and stuff, and they're probably the most safest for bears and for people. And a lot of times, we're talking about really a developed area right now. So they tend to be more night active in developed areas if they encounter developed areas. As you go up the line there to the diagonal line too, they start picking up. Like I said before, the mother trains them to stay away from people if she's a truly wild mother. And these the yearling bears will actually start getting hungry, and they'll go around picnic areas or overlooks where there's garbage cans, and they'll smell the lingering smells of people, and also they'll smell Kentucky Fried Chicken, they'll smell hamburgers, hot dogs, things like that too, things that smell really good to them, pretty sweet things. So anyway, they initially at nighttime, when no people are there, they'll investigate that. They'll say, you know, mama's not here. So I'm gonna go down and see what this good smell is. And they'll go down and get rewarded for tolerating that lingering smells of people. So pretty soon what changes is these animals become accustomed to the smell of people. So what happens is they cross this dotted line here in the center, and they basically will start coming in at dusk, because the main reason is the quality and the quantity of food increases when they become day active. So they become active at dusk, and they're looking for unattended picnic tables. They'll jump on there and get those. And then pretty soon they'll progress on up to where they'll start getting handouts from people. They'll start chasing people off of picnic tables or at overlooks or wherever too. Then they'll get to the point, if you let them keep on going long enough, they'll actually mimic the same patterns of the people. They'll come in for breakfast. They'll go back up in the woods. They'll come back in at lunch when people are cooking, and they'll repeat that for dinner too, before everyone leaves too. So it's really interesting what we've learned. One thing we have done is that we will sometimes use a behavioral reversal technique, and it's just basically capture and release on site. We'll catch the bear in this night active period, ear tag it, tattoo it, and then release it back in the area. That's a negative experience. So what you try to do is make the negative experience greater than the positive. Bear behavior. I'm gonna go through these pretty quickly. Wild behavior is what we want. They hear you, they see you, they smell you, they hit the road. Habituated is those bears that feed naturally near human areas. They feed right along roadsides, but they're eating natural foods. Their motive is to eat naturally. It just so happens it's near that. So those animals will get closer. Food conditioned are those animals that basically they have gotten food. They have been hooked on food, garbage, whatever, and they are approaching people trying to get their food away from us. Offensive behavior is something to be concerned about. I use the example. Let's say, for example, if you run someone down to steal money from them, or let's say steal food from them, then obviously that's an offensive behavior. You're going after those people or after that person, try to get something from them. Now, once you acquire that, and all of a sudden then you move back or something, and then those people come toward you, you've claimed that money, food, whatever too. And when they come toward you, then you're trying to defend what you have. So that's a big difference. So predatory behavior is another form of offensive. They basically are looking at people as a potential source of food. And that's the most dangerous type of encounter that we deal with. One of the key points of predatory behavior is that typically they go after the smallest person. Happens normally in the spring and fall, not always, generally speaking. The persistence of attack, they play for keeps, typically a male bear, not always. And normally there's no human food involved at all. Defensive is the most common, and it's the one that when it bluff charges, swats the ground, shakes the vegetation too, it's telling you you're too close, and what you should do is back up. And so it's very, very important that people understand those different type of behaviors. Okay. Next slide. Okay, what to do if you encounter a bear? Maintain a safe distance. Common sense. I mean, pretty self-explanatory. Understand the bear behavior before you act. wild bears, they run habituated, that maintain a safe distance. Don't approach those bears. In the Smokies, we have a 50-yard distance that you basically have to maintain if you are in the presence of bears. Defensive behavior, try to safely move away. If you walk around a curve, you're hiking, you walk around, and there's a bear eating a carcass, a deer carcass, or it's eating blackberries, blueberries, whatever it may be, and you walk around and surprise it, it may and it'll start blowing. Well, that's a defensive behavior. It's telling you that you need to back away, and that's what you need to do. Offensive is, it may be after your food, so it may be following you on the trail because it learned from someone before they threw their food down, and it's approaching you thinking you might do the same thing too, and they become more and more persistent if they're unable to get your food. Now, they may be after you. They may be evaluating you too. So these bears that follow people on trail are the most concerning to me. I don't know what they're thinking. Now, if someone takes off running, then obviously those bears may chase someone, just like dogs. Some dogs are prone to chase people if they run. So anyway, it's very, very important that you understand that predatory, though, they consider you prey, and their intention is really to basically kill and consume you. And so that's the most serious one. Well, how should you react? We tell people really quickly, if you see a bear, try to back up, give it some space. You're on the trail. If it approaches you, give it the right of way. Move out of the way. Let that bear go down the trail, down a ridge line, whatever. Try to get out of its way. If it turns and comes toward you, then we tell people, then at that point, you have to reestablish your dominance of that animal. You've got to be bigger and meaner than that bear to tell that bear you are not going to tolerate it coming any closer. It's okay to pick up rocks, sticks, throw it at the bear, yell, scream, speak very authoritatively, get up on a rock to make yourself look big as possible. If you have children, keep them inside the little circle of people. There's power in numbers. So try to keep their children, because remember what I said before, if it's predatory, they typically go after the smallest person. So anyway, we tell people that if it gets close enough to you, maybe bear spray. If you have bear spray, deploy bear spray. If it's a problem, the bear's going to be very close. We tell people, don't throw your food to it until it comes close enough to where it actually makes contact with your leg or your arm or something like that. If it does, if it makes contact, we then separate yourself from your food. Now, if it runs over to your food and sniffs your food and gets it and walks off, then obviously its motive was to get your food. If it smells your food and it turns and comes towards you, then it's the most serious encounter, and it's probably coming after you. And so at this point, you have to reestablish your dominance. You have to be as mean, as tough as you possibly can too. So if it does jump on you, we tell people to fight back. Do not play dead. Generally speaking, there are a couple of cases where that's not always true, but for the majority of the time, if you're jumped on by a black bear and it's not after your food, then we tell people the right thing is to fight back. So that's just a real quick overview of dealing with bears, and we hope you picked up a couple things from that. So, okay, thanks.
All right. Thanks, Kim. That was great. I'm Susie Spikol, and I'm a naturalist at the Harris Center in Hancock, New Hampshire, a very small little town where we have a lot of bears. And I just want everybody to know up front that I'm not a bear expert. I am a person who teaches people about the natural history of bears. And today, that's what I'm hoping to do. I'm hoping to share with you some of the amazing adaptations that bears have, and how, in a way, we can look at bears and humans as somewhat similar, though there are differences, and how that kinship or similarity, or what we can notice about their adaptations and ourselves, can be engaging ways to learn about black bears. So the first adaptation I'd like to talk about is something that a really good friend of mine shared, Mark Ellingwood. He's the retired wildlife biologist for Fish and Game. He was the director for their department for a long time. And he said a bear is basically a tremendous sense of smell attached to an incredible appetite. And that's really true. You can see there that the bear's sense of smell is 7 times better than a bloodhound and 2,100 times better than a human. If you looked at the snout of a bear and you compared it to the snout of a human, the bear would have 100 times more smelling capacity than we do. And the statistics the studies seem to say that bears can smell up to 20 miles away. That's on a good day when the wind is blowing right, but they certainly have an incredible sense of smell. And this incredible sense of smell really drives them. They are driven by their need to eat. They're a big animal and they're always looking to fuel that mass, especially summer into autumn. And so they're really driven by that. And what I like to think about, and you can advance the slide, Vaughn, is that there's ways for us as people to kind of connect with our own sense of smell and see if we could see the world the way that bears do, through smelling. And so with young children, if you have young children of your own or grandchildren, or you're an educator yourself, what I typically do with preschoolers and even some younger ones is I set up some smell jars that have odors in them, kind of cotton balls soaked in, let's say, vanilla extract or some sort of banana extract or mint. And then I just have kids smell it and make a match. So you have two of each and they try to find the matches, and also be able to use words to describe it. As kids get older, when we work with kids in elementary schools, we do this really great project with them where we soak a pretty big stretch of string, 6 feet to 10 feet long, in something really rich with odor. We use vanilla extract a lot, or mint extract. We soak it, and then we have kids work in pairs, and we have one person set up a trail using the string on the ground, and then the other person is blindfolded and they have to get down and sniff the trail and follow it as it goes from one end to the other. And I know I'm talking about elementary kids, but if any adults out there try it, it's really cool. This is really a key way that most mammals make sense of the world around them, particularly bears, is being able to follow that smell. If you think about smell, visual things are kind of ephemeral. Sound, same thing. You hear something, it's gone. But for an animal like a bear, the smell lingers on, and they can assess a lot of information by the odor. And that's why a lot of times you'll see, or you might have noticed in photographs, bears will be standing up on their feet. They're sniffing the air and they're getting this current of what's out there, and they can read and tell so much about the world around them. And so these activities are really just to help us as humans try to think about what it would be like if we really depended on our sense of smell. I think the most fun and challenging thing that we do is something called the onion trail. This is really fun for middle school grades and up. It's great for adults. You take an onion, you cut it in half. One person leaves a scent on a trail, on a tree, and they go and they leave like 15 marks on different trees, leading a trail from one end to where the person hides. And then the people that are left behind have to sniff the trees around them to find which trees are scented with the onion. And if you think about it, this is really a similar way to how bears are making sense of the world around them. They use their scent marking. You'll see bear bites and bear scratches. Those are visual cues, but every time there's a bear marking on a scratch tree or a bear bite on a telephone pole, they have scent glands in the sides of their mouth, in the pads of their paws, and they're actually leaving a scent more than a visual clue. So this onion trail is a great way to try it. All right, Vaughn, let's see what else we have. All right, I just want to warn everybody, we're having a really big thunderstorm. It just started, so if I disappear, it's because we lost electricity, but hopefully that won't happen. I like to think of bears as the original seasonal local flexitarian. It's a very trendy thing for us to say that we eat as flexitarians and we eat local, but bears have been doing it ever since. So have many other wild animals, but bears have a really similar diet to us humans. They eat the similar things that we do. They have a variety of foods. It's seasonally based. When they wake up in the spring, they're really feeding on a lot of those fresh green forbs that are coming up. They head to the wetlands and eat those, at least in New England. This time of the year, they're really focusing on kind of the insects, the roots, the blossoms, the fruits, the berries. There's often a time where they'll eat a lot of carrion. In the spring, they'll eat fawn they have a kind of a window of time where they eat the little fawns that are just born, but they eat a really diverse diet. And to do that, they have a really diverse mouth, kind of similar to our own mouths. Bears have 42 teeth. Humans have 32. We have a similar structure with our incisors, and then our canines and our premolars or carnassials, our shredding teeth, and then our flat molars. And the bears have that too. They have some extra teeth. They eat a more fibrous diet than we do. They have some spacing between their premolars that help them strip the bark when they're eating the inner bark of trees in the springtime. They have really good flat molars for grinding up all those things, but they have a lot of other adaptations around their mouth that make them such great flexitarians. They have a really, really long tongue. Their tongue kind of comes all the way down. If they stuck it out, it would kind of be all the way down to the bottom of their neck almost. That long tongue is really important for them because they eat a lot of insects, especially those colonial insects like ants and bees, and they can get their tongue right into the crevices to eat that. They have really flexible and usable lips. They're able to pull berries off the trees and eat the berries right off the trees. And that's really fun if you ever try that on your own to do that. Eat a berry without your hands. They actually have kind of a 2-compartment belly system where they have a belly that kind of can just store food. It can be really expansive and store food. And then they have a belly that kind of can grind up seeds and berries, so that when they eat a lot of berries at once, they don't have to chew them up as much. They kind of mash them up, send it to the belly, and then the belly has this muscle that kind of grinds it up. And I thought that my son, I have a 19-year-old son, I thought he was a really fast berry eater, but bears are even faster. And bears have some unique adaptations too when they're feeding. They'll climb up a tree. They don't wait for fruits and seeds to fall down. They have those claws. They're great tree climbers. They'll climb up a tree, something like a beech tree here in New Hampshire. The beech nut is highly valued as a protein source. They don't wait for the beech nuts to hit the ground because other animals would get them before them. They'll climb up right before they're kind of ripe, and they'll make a bear nest. They'll break off the branches and they'll stick it under them, and then they'll just feed on the nuts. They'll do that with beech nuts, acorns, cherries, even shadbush or serviceberry is something they'll do that with as well. So when I'm thinking about bears and their mouths and their eating habits, and I'm thinking about how to help people kind of understand bears, we have some different activities. And Vaughn, if you want to advance, I can share that. For preschoolers or young people, very little people, you've heard of the teddy bears picnic. Well, at the Harris Center where I work, we don't do the teddy bears picnic. We do a black bears picnic where we just have food available that bears would eat, from berries and types of nuts and fruits and vegetation and things like that. We don't usually eat carrion or ants or things like that, but we can kind of pretend sometimes. We have the kids dress up like bears. They get really into it. It's sort of living in the fur of the bear and being the bear. And then for elementary grade kids, a lot of times we do comparisons of the human mouth to the bear mouth. And so we'll have a variety of foods out, from carrots or something crunchy that would kind of resemble a branch or vegetation, to jerky, beef jerky, something they have to really work out, to some sorts of nuts. And they'll bite the food that they're going to eat, and then they'll map on a human mouth what teeth they're using, how they're using their tongue, and then they'll compare that to bears. And we'll do a lot of watching of how bears eat through videos. So really just kind of thinking about similarities of how we eat, how our mouth functions, and how bears' mouths work, and how they also have to eat and consume. And then for middle grades and up, we do a lot of resource inventory work where we'll go out behind the schools. We'll look at what is a black bear's common diet, and then we'll have kids work on identifying what's available in the green areas near their schools, and would it make good bear habitat. Where I work in New Hampshire is relatively rural, so the answer to this is usually yes. And sometimes we're even lucky enough to find some bear footprints, which leads me to my next slide. let's talk about tracking out here in New England, and perhaps where you live, you get an opportunity to see bear footprints. This is for me as a person interested in mammals. That's my specialty as a naturalist. This is my most exciting find, when I can see a bear footprint or bear tracks, and really thinking about how their feet are very similar to us. They're one of the only wild mammals that we have in this area that are plantigrades. They walk on their full back foot, so they'll leave a whole footprint, kind of like us. Their front paws, they don't often leave the full, they'll just leave the claws and the front part of the pad. They have 5 toes, just like we do. They walk in a similar way. They overstep, where their back foot will come forward and their front foot will be behind, sort of a typical waddling pattern of what we like to call. What's really cool about them too is that they stand up. I mentioned that. You'll have seen probably pictures of them standing on their hind legs. So what is the advantage of that? There's a really great behavioral adaptation advantage for that. And that is, it gets them up. They can smell things at a different level. They can hear things. Bears' real first line of defense is their hearing. They'll really listen. And so standing up, they get out of the undergrowth and they can really listen to what's out there. Their ears are mobile. They can turn, they can twitch. They're really paying attention to the sounds that are around them, the air that's around them. Plus, it gives them a visual ability to see out and above. So standing up on their back feet, very human presence. And maybe that's part of the reason why there's so many great stories in different cultures about bears and humans sort of being of the same tribe or culture, or same people or kin, is their ability to stand on those hind feet. But it does have a really important role. It also can communicate a defensive posture. So when 2 bears encounter each other, they're generally pretty solitary. So only time that the bears are together is when the mother's raising the young. So standing up, if there's another bear in the territory, can communicate kind of their defensive posture. And when we are tracking with kids, so Vaughn, you can kind of switch to the next one. With young children, we just spend a lot of time comparing feet and looking at human feet compared to a bear foot, do a lot of stepping in paint and putting our feet down, and then using rubber stamps or bear stamps to look and compare, moving like a bear, kind of trying to walk like a bear, trying to even do some climbing like a bear. For older kids, we spend a lot of time outside tracking. We're so fortunate in my neck of the woods that across New Hampshire, our 4th grade topic is mammals of New Hampshire. So all 4th graders in this area spend a bunch of time tracking with the Harris Center. And we do often find bear sign when we're tracking prior to them denning up for the winter. There's also other signs that we look for, and that we do an inventory with middle grades and up, and that's those bear bites. In our area, bears are notorious biters and markers of telephone poles. So they'll bite it on the side and they'll leave a chunk, take out a chunk, and that you can find bear hair kind of plastered into the telephone poles where they bit it. You can find the marks where they scratch it. So we have students across our area doing inventories of their roads and determining what the bear sign is. And then because we've done this for a few years, we have data on if there's fresh bear sign happening. So this is actually a really fun way for kids, for older kids, to begin to be aware of all the different ways that animals leave sign in our neighborhood. So I guess I would just end with, this is my last slide, to just end with that my hope today from my part of the presentation is that I've given you some things to think about on bear adaptations, how they're so well adapted to survive, but also how we as humans can look at them and kind of understand them and kind of get in their footprints or their skin, put on some bear fur. So Vaughn and Kim, I think we're ready for a Q&A.
Thank you so much, Susie and Kim. That was fantastic. So much great knowledge there. And we do have some questions coming in from our Facebook live streams. I'm always concerned when doing a long hike and snacking while hiking. If a bear smells my food, is this dangerous? Would either of you like to answer that?
And I can try that. Yeah, obviously, bears are going to smell good things out there all the time too. But I think you need to understand if animals are wild or something, they're not going to approach people even though they smell something good, unless, let me say some exception. If a bear's starving to death, and that doesn't happen very often, but if the bear's injured, starving to death, they may be a little more persistent too. But for the most part, they know there's a hierarchy. They know that people are above them in a hierarchy and more dominant too. So they've been taught to stay away from people. So typically, I wouldn't think many bears, unless they lost their fear of people, wild bears typically are going to stay away from people no matter what they smell.
Thank you. And another question we have from Facebook. Can you address and explain what the BearMuta Triangle methods is for the backcountry bear safety?
Vaughn, I can speak to it, actually.
Oh,
I know exactly what he's talking about. So the BearMuta Triangle is, if you think about an overnight campsite, you have where you sleep, where you eat, and where you're cooking. Where you're storing your food. So you're eating, you're cooking in the same place, you're storing your food. And ideally, there's 200 feet in between each of those points. That works really, really well in areas on the PCT, the Pacific Crest Trail. But a lot of the sites along the Appalachian Trail, particularly the shelters in the Smokies, are not designed with that space in mind. So it's actually really hard to achieve that on the AT. I think the closest that we're ever going to get to it on the Appalachian Trail is if you eat your food, say, a mile before you get to camp. And then you get to camp and you just store your food, whether it's on the bear cable system or using a bear canister. And then you don't have to worry about having any of those scents that go into the air as you're cooking your ramen noodles at night.
Thank you for answering that, Chloe. And we've got some great questions coming in here. Eddie Kirk asked earlier, are there any smells that bears do not like?
Well, I'll just say that in where I am, people have been having a lot of problems with bears and their bird feeders, and they've been trying a lot of different types of hot pepper sprays and things like that. And what they're finding is that doesn't seem to deter the bears. There doesn't seem to be an odor or something that you could put out that deters a bear from coming in to your bird feeder that I've heard of. Kim, do you have any other information?
No, that actually, probably not to add to that, but it did remind me one thing that was said too about bear spray. And bear spray really is not a cure-all. It's organic, and so you can't spray it on the ground, a circle around your tent, or you can't spray it on your backpack or tent or whatever. It can serve as an attractant, just kind of what you mentioned there. It can serve as an attractant rather than a deterrent or repellent too. So basically, you have to get the stuff in the eyes to burn the eyes too. So it can actually draw bears in rather than move them away.
I've seen out in the Smokies before. I used to be a ridge runner out there, and people would be always surprised when I would ask them to hang anything that had a scent to it. So sunscreen, toothpaste, lip balms, cigarettes. They always were like, oh, I would never eat that. Why would a bear eat that? And I would just stress that it doesn't matter if it's not in a bear's diet. They're still curious animals, and they're going to check it out if it has a scent that's not native to that area.
One thing I might mention with bear behavior is that a lot of times bears, once they learn to get food from something, could be a cooler, could be a backpack or two, when they come in and they're trying to hurry and come in and get whatever's there, they may run by and get your empty pack and take it off somewhere and destroy it because they've gotten food from it before, and they remember that. Same thing with a cooler. They may run through and pick up an empty cooler and take off because they've gotten food out of something very similar to that in the past.
I just want to add to that the bear's memory is really remarkable, and that there's a lot of learned behavior that the mother passes on to the young. And so if the mother is habituated, she passes the behavior on to the young. I've seen that. I'm a beekeeper. I've seen that with my beehives, and having to kind of put electric fencing around my beehives. And now I've got it to the point where the bear, it recognizes the electric fence, and it knows not to come near the electric fence. It's had a bad experience with it. It doesn't come back. And that behavior seems to have been taught to the young as well.
Thank you all. We have room for a few more questions. So the next one after Eddie's was from Greg Williams. What are your suggestions for hanging a bear bag? How exactly would you do it? Just as a note, ATC highly recommends bear canisters to be used on the trail. But there, would anyone else like to speak on hanging a bear bag typically?
I might mention one thing, Vaughn, about that too. Years ago, that was the regulations in the Great Smoky Mountains were, 10 feet off the ground, 4 feet away from a limb or a tree. And at that time, the forest was fairly, young compared to what it is today. And there was plenty of low-lying limbs. You could throw it across a limb and string it between two trees. And that's not the case in a lot of our campsites. So you really just to have a trunk or something, it takes a little ingenuity to be able to hang that up. And since you don't have a ladder or some method to be able to climb the tree. So, and a lot of these people, especially with horse groups, they have a lot of food, they have a lot of weight too, and it's really can't get that off the ground too. So that kind of sparked me to be able to go and try to find some alternative food storage system for the backcountry. And so we came up with the food storage cables that we have in the Smokies now to help people too, because the trees have got much larger too, and it was tougher. It's really tough to hang your food if there's no low-lying limbs on that situation.
Thank you, Kim. And another question is there, from Al Farrell, is there a time to take the defensive position face down with the back of your neck covered, or is the black bear method different from that of the grizzly bear method for defense, personal defense?
Yeah, I can definitely answer that too. And it is a different message too. If it's a grizzly bear, typically brown bears or grizzly bears, if you surprise them, sometimes they will attack a person too. Black bears, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. There's, let's say, mothers, the younger the mother, the less prone as she may be to defend her cubs. Let me say that. Most people think if you get between a mother and a cub, it's always going to end up the wrong way. That's not always true. But obviously, if you're attacked by a black bear, like I said, only a couple of exceptions, the best thing to do is to fight back. Their nose is sensitive, their eyes are sensitive. You can somehow, if you have car keys or something that's sharp, to be able to get in their eyes, to be able to get them off of you. There was a case in New Mexico where a young girl was attacking her tent at nighttime, and she apparently played dead, and it ate I don't know, 4 or 5 pounds of flesh off of her hip before she ever started yelling and screaming for help too, to get the bear away too. So typically there's not many cases where you would play dead and bear and cover your neck up. You always want to fight back, because typically if they're jumping on you, they're not after your food, then they're considering you prey, and fighting back is most appropriate.
I am very curious about this next question myself. Kim, or Susie, can either of you tell us more about different noises bears will use and what the meanings are? Jennifer Watson asked this, and she was hiking and walked beside a bear in a bush. It huffed at her and kept walking. Impersonations welcome. What are the different noises that bears make?
Yeah, I've got some experiences too to relay that too. But obviously, if I understand, a bear was walking by her and started huffing, and it went by her. Is that correct?
It was in a bush as she passed it, and then she kept walking. Well,
what it's doing, you walked near, and maybe it was eating something there. I'm not sure. You got in its space. Let me say that. You got in that bear space, and that, or popping their jaws, or those things. It's a defensive behavior, and the bear is telling you that you need to move away from it. Okay. And my recommendation is you should do that.
Yeah. I'll just add to that. I've had a lot of experiences with this too. Chuffing, I think, is what I've heard it called, at least here, is when they kind of huff and kind of wheeze at the same time, and then the jaw popping, where they pop their jaw, sort of like snap their mouth really loud. And that is really like, get moving, move out of my area. And then I've heard of foot stomping too. Kim, have you heard that? They'll do some stomping and kind of shaking, and that's another defensive kind of like, right, you're in my space.
Right. What they're trying to tell you, they're big, mean, and tough too. That they want you to move away. So I describe it swatting the ground, but you're right, stomping their feet. and they'll grab vegetation and shake the vegetation. They're trying to be as intimidating as they possibly can to get you to move away too. And obviously most people accommodate that. They move away pretty quickly.
Okay, and we might have room for a couple more final questions. How about from Dave Flesher? What about removing scented lotions and sunscreen at night before sleeping?
Yes, you don't want to be sleeping with scented items in your tent. I think, Chloe, am I right? You would want to put that in the bear bag and hang it, or the canister. That's what we recommend from when we have our campsites out around here. And I definitely have know people that have left their toothbrush in their tent and it is not so good, or even in the back of their truck, having left an empty sunscreen container in the back of their truck, and the bear broke in through the truck windows, the cap windows, and got in. So I don't know if Kim, you want to add anything to that, or Chloe?
Well, I just say anything that smells. We've had one lady I remember over in Bone Valley campsite in Hazel Creek years ago that she was sleeping in a hammock, and I might mention hammocks here just in a second, but she actually, I think what she had done, the bear come through and she was like, it's right at eye level with her. It come through and bit her on the thigh. And I suspect that what she does, she probably was cooking or something and then rubbed her hands on her blue jeans and then went to sleep. And basically it smelled something there and it thought it was food. And so it grabbed that too. I might mention one thing just to add that I didn't mention before is we've had we would classify as predatory behaviors since 2000 in the Smokies. 6 total. I think 2 of those have been hikers. 1, I think, was in a tent, and 3 of those were in hammocks. And the younger generation tell me, which most people are in that younger generation, that hammocks is a craze. People love to sleep in hammocks. And I'm just telling you, to me, it would place you at a higher risk camping in the backcountry where there are plenty of bears. And Smokies have over 1,900 bears, and they have a lot of bears. And so I personally think there's some stress in a population that is full or near carrying capacity. And so somebody is going to get hungry. And so it may cause some bears to do some things they would normally do before. So I personally would not, I wouldn't want me or my kids or grandkids to sleep in a hammock in the backcountry with bears. Just my opinion, nor sometimes running down trails, jogging on trails. Sometimes some bears are prone to chase people that run, just like dogs do the same thing too. Just a couple observations and things I've dealt with in the past.
Thank you, Kim. And before we go on to raffle, we have room for one more question that came in through Facebook. Do either of you have any other tips or points for folks that don't feel as though the large bear canister will fit their long haul packing gear? And here's an example of your typical size bear canister on my screen here.
I can tell you from what I've seen on the trail, I see a lot of thru hikers that will attach them to their top of their pack. They are pretty weather resistant. And I see that as a success. I always try to sell bear canisters as a seat. You have a built-in seat no matter what. So yeah, it's extra weight, but I was telling Kim and Susie, I've been bluff charged by by a bear in the Smokies before. And that was enough to solidify that I will carry a bear canister for the rest of my life, because I realized it doesn't so much matter if nothing happens to me. If I'm cooking and I leave my trash in a fire pit, or I am sleeping with my food in my tent, but if I'm acclimating a bear to come back the next night and actually sniff around and check out other people's tents, that's just going to continue that behavior and hurt someone that's coming behind me. So that experience was I'll carry a bear canister. It's not that big of a deal. And you get used to the weight very easily. And thru hikers are also very smart and creative. So I've seen some cool tricks to attach them to packs.
One thing Vonna might mention too, that Chloe said too, is in the backcountry, a lot of people feel like it's okay to pour your scraps and leftover food into a pit grill. It's going to burn. Well, it will not burn up. And nighttime garbage or pit grills in the backcountry is one of the first things that draws bears into where people camp and sleep too. So be very conscious of people around you not having people to throw their scraps or pour leftover liquids and stuff inside of a fire pit, because those smells are there. They're real, and bears are going to come in. That's the first thing they're going to check out.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our presenters, to Susie and to Kim and Chloe. Thanks so much as well from the ATC perspective, chiming in and sharing some knowledge and input as well. These were also riveting questions. My palms are sweating from some of these responses. It's a high adrenaline subject. So I've dropped in our chat the email addresses for both Kim Deloizer and Susie Spikol if you have any other questions you'd like to reach out to them about related to bears. I've also provided some key links from ATC if you'd like to continue to be updated on the summer Bear Canister Loaner program, and also a Bear Encounter report form and other information on safety surrounding bears on the trail. We are going to switch to our raffle. And so, again, Bear Vault has generously offered to donate one of their bear canisters to the lucky winner. All right, Dave, please go ahead and stay on, whether it be if you're on Facebook or here on Zoom, and we will get your contact information, and Bear Vault will personally send you a canister. So congratulations, Dave. Thanks for joining us on Zoom. And thank you all for joining this adventure session today. Our next adventure session is happening July 21st, and it will be on nature journaling. We're thrilled to host the next set of presenters. And again, thank you, Susie and Kim, for joining us today. We appreciate you all.